Everyone's here. That was my proof. I hit record. So we're going to be reviewing for the second A&P 1 exam. Those of you that are in the Zoom, we do already have a practice lecture exam available to you in Frio 111. If you can't make it to campus before your exam, you can email me afterwards and I can send it to you. So the chapters that will be covered on exam 2 is chapter 4, which is tissues, the living fabric, chapter 5, the integumentary system, and chapter 6, bones and skeletal tissue. One of the issues or problems that students tend to get caught up in is they are studying chapter 7 for your lecture exam. Chapter 7 is all bone anatomy, so it should not come up on your actual lecture exam. It should just be chapter 6 regarding the skeletal system. Okay, so I'm going to jump right into it. We should be a little bit familiar already with tissues because we did cover those on our first lab exam. The first thing you're going to want to know is the 4 basic tissue types and their function. So altogether, the 4 basic tissue types: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. Epithelial, we find these covering the body in different organ surfaces. These line cavities and form glands, which we will talk about in a little bit. Connective tissue are kind of the more complicated ones, or actually epithelial and connective are the 2 more complicated ones. Connective's function is to bind, support, and protect. Muscle tissue, it contracts to produce movement. And then nervous tissue sends messages or impulses to the rest of your body. So again, you're going to want to know the 4 basic tissue types, their function, where they're found. I left out a lot of the like naming of the epithelial tissues or the differences in the connective tissues, just because we already went over that for the lab exam. If you do need a refresher on that, you can go watch our video on YouTube. What was it? Lab exam 1 review. And I did go over the tissues more in depth. Okay, and then moving along, we start getting into our glands. So we call these glandular epithelia. These are 1 or more cells that make and secrete a product, and these are called secretions. So you've probably heard of these before. They're called secretions. So we have 2 types. We have endocrine and exocrine glands. Endocrine may sound a little bit familiar because you have your endocrine system. Endocrine glands, these are ductless glands. The product is hormones, and these are secreted directly into the extracellular space and then into your blood. So this is happening internally. And your endocrine glands include your pituitary, thyroid, pancreas. There's a few more, but just in case you need to be able to name a few, here they are: pituitary, thyroid, and pancreas. So again, endocrine, this has to do with your hormones. And then along those lines, we also have our exocrine glands. These are also multicellular glands that secrete their products into a duct onto another body surface or cavity. So this includes mucus, sweat, oil, salivary. And then the thing with exocrine glands is they may be multicellular or unicellular. So I can see this being asked like a true or false question. True or false, exocrine glands may be multicellular or unicellular. True. Or true or false, exocrine glands are only multicellular. That would be false. Then we also have some modes of secretion. So we just talked about what a secretion is. Now we're going to talk about the different modes. We have holocrine, merocrine, and then apocrine. Holocrine glands secrete their product by rupturing and dying in the process. So an example of this is an oil or sebaceous gland. Merocrine glands secrete their product by exocytosis. And then an example of these are salivary glands, pancreas, and most of your sweat glands. And then apocrine glands secrete their product by pinching the apex of the cell, which then releases the secretory granules and a small amount of cytoplasm. And an example of this are mammary glands. For these specific modes of secretion, I would know the difference between them, what they do, and then an example of each. And these modes of secretion have to do with what type of tissue? Epithelial, good. So that's why we see these a lot of these secretions happening within our the integumentary system that we're going to talk about next. Okay, and then moving on to connective tissue. The kind of big thing about connective tissue is it all arises from a singular place. Where is that? Or it arises from a type of tissue. Mesenchyme, yeah. Remember, this is in embryonic tissue. And all connective tissue arises from mesenchyme, mesenchyme. Another thing to know, let's see. The connective tissue have like different levels of vascularity. So going back, epithelial tissue is avascular. And connective tissue varies in the amount of vascularity that it has. So when we're talking about cartilage connective tissue, this is avascular. Dense connective tissue is poorly vascularized. And then other types of connective tissue have like a rich supply. And then another big thing to know from connective tissue is it's comprised of cells, ground substance, and fibers. And then again, I'm not going to go through all of the types of connective tissue. You can find that in the review from a few weeks ago. But another thing I wanted to add, because it was in the notes from the professors, is tendons and ligaments, which are made from connective tissue. Tendons connect muscle to bone, and then ligaments connect bone to bone. I wanted to put that in there just because we are talking about the skeletal system on this exam.
The ligaments do bone to bone?
Correct, yeah.
And tendons to bone to muscle.
Yeah, muscle to bone. Okay. So continuing on, again, epithelial and connective are the more complicated ones. Muscle tissue is pretty straightforward. We have our three types: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. I'll come back and talk about these, but the big things to know: skeletal is voluntary. So we don't automatically wake up in the morning and we have to start like lifting weights, or our body doesn't automatically start moving. We kind of have to tell our body to do it, as opposed to cardiac muscle and smooth, where they're involuntary, they're doing it on its own. Our body isn't, or we don't have to think about our heart pumping, it just does it. So that's what categorizes this as involuntary, and smooth as well, involuntary. And then I do have this picture up here. So it's just letting you know, right? Skeletal is voluntary, just like lifting weights. Skeletal connects to the skeleton and other structures. And it helps with movement and stability. So anytime you're stretching, walking, doing any sort of physical activity, that is your skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle is found within the walls of the heart. This is involuntary, and it contracts in a rhythmic way to pump blood. And then we have smooth muscle, found in the walls of blood vessels and hollow organs. And this is again involuntary. And it's not until the next unit that you'll need to be able to identify the different muscles based on models. Those of you in the lab, it's up here in this corner up here. You don't need to know that until the next unit, but you still do need to know, right? Skeletal muscle is striated involuntary. Cardiac is involuntary, and it has what that the other muscle tissues do not have, the presence of what? Intercalated discs, good. This is also striated, and then smooth muscle is smooth. So I can see this being asked, list some anatomical differences between the types of muscle tissue, and then you would have to explain that. Okay, we'll put this back up, but going back one, we also have nervous tissue. These are made of neuroglia and neurons. Neuroglia supports the neurons, and these are in various sizes, shapes, and locations. And then these neurons communicate via impulses. These are comprised of a cell body, dendrites, and axon. We do talk about this more in the fourth unit. So from nervous tissue, you just need to know that it has neuroglia and neurons. The neuroglia support the neurons communicate. Okay, and then we start talking about the epithelial membranes. So we did touch on one of these on the very first exam, which you will get to come to see. Epithelial membranes are continuous multicellular sheets composed of epithelium bound to a layer of connective tissue proper. And we have three common types: cutaneous, mucous, and serous. So our cutaneous membrane is our skin. Does anybody know what tissue that comprises, what that makes up? Yeah, keratinized stratified squamous epithelium is our skin or cutaneous membrane. And I'll put a picture up in a second. The mucous membrane, it lines body cavities open to the exterior. So these are wet or moist membranes bathed by secretions. Does anybody know what type of tissue this is? Yeah, stratified squamous or simple columnar are found in the mucous membrane. And then we have our serous membranes. These are moist membranes found within our closed body cavities. This is the one we talked about a few weeks ago. And the serous membranes are simple squamous epithelium resting on loose areolar connective tissue. And these are those that we talked about. So this first image up here is just skin, right? That's what we can see externally. Right here we have our mucous membrane and then our serous. So again, we did talk about the parietal visceral, those membranes. Make sure you go back and look at those. A lot of students were confused on the first exam because this image in the book was not in the first chapter. It's found in chapter 4. So this specific image is from your worksheets. I think it was like the first one. You can find this in chapter 4. Let's see. Okay, now we're going to move on to chapter 5, the integumentary system. The integumentary system comprises of the skin and its derivatives, sweat and oil glands, hairs, and nails. A lot of the times they'll use that word derivative on the exams, and it's the first time students are seeing it. It's basically like what comes from the integumentary system. So oil glands, hair, nails. So the function of the integumentary system is protection, excretion, sensation, metabolic functions, and it acts as a blood reservoir. And a lot of what we're going to go over right now, we're just going to talk about the whys, not really the wheres, because this like whole structure is more lab-based. So we're going to start off talking about the epidermis, which is this part up here. It consists of keratinized stratified squamous epithelium and has 4 to 5 distinct layers. And it's made up from 4 distinct cell types, which I have here: the keratinocytes, melanocytes, Merkel cells, and Langerhans cells. Once you kind of get the names down, it makes a lot more sense. So what do we think keratinocytes produce? Keratin, good. So keratin is the protein that gives skin its protective and waterproof characteristics. The melanocytes produce what? Melanin, good. The pigment giving skin its color. Merkel cells, these are the sensory function for touch. And then lastly, the Langerhans cells, which are macrophages that help activate your immune system. Okay, so that was the epidermis. You're going to want to know what it consists of and then the different cells that are present in the epidermis. And then moving down to our dermis. This is composed of connective tissue proper. And this contains your hair follicles, oils, and sweat glands. And then it also has 2 major areas. So we have the papillary layer and then the reticular. Oh, I skipped a section. I skipped something on the epidermis, the layers of the epidermis. So you guys won't be able to see it because it's really tiny down here, but possibly the people in the Zoom can see it. It's a like acronym and it covers the layers from superficial to deep. So the acronym is covers like a good soft blanket. So that's the stratum corneum, stratum lucidum, covers like a good would be stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and then stratum basal. So talking about the lecture exam, you're going to want to know the different layers and then the order in which they are, but also their functions.
That was the one you just said, right?
Yeah, the epidermis. I skipped over that.
These are- What was the acronym again?
Covers like a good soft blanket. And it's going from superficial to deep. Okay, back to the dermis. We were talking about the papillary and reticular layer. The papillary has papillae or ridges that project into your epithelial skin tissue and form patterns, which are our fingerprints. So specifically in Mr. Torres's class, he was talking about the like body ridges that when you get any type of surgery, if it's not emergency surgery, right? If you're getting some type of plastic surgery, they try to cut along those lines because they like reformate very well. Those are those specific ridges, the papillae. And then we also, that would be the first major area of the dermis. There's also the reticular layer. Let's see. The reticular layer is made of dense, irregular connective tissue and accounts for 80% of the dermis. A lot of the integumentary stuff is lab, so I'm kind of going to run through this. Lastly, we have the hypodermis. This is mostly adipose tissue, and that's down here. And this anchors the skin to the underlying structures or muscles. Another big thing to know about the hypodermis, it's a shock absorber and insulator. Okay, and then continuing on with the integumentary system, we have skin color is determined by 3 pigments. The big one that we talk about in class is melanin, which again, we talked about is produced by melanocytes. These are then transferred to keratinocytes. And then the melanin production increases when exposed to sun. What is what is it called when your body has the inability of melanocytes to produce melanin? It's a specific name. Oh yeah, albinism. Yes. And then freckles and moles are localized accumulations of melanin. Okay, and then that's melanin, carotene, pretty easy to remember, yellow-orange pigment found in plants. Carrots, that's where it gets its name. In humans, this pigment accumulates in the stratum corneum. This is most prominent in your palms and your soles. So the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. And then lastly, we have hemoglobin. This is the pinkish hue of fair skin due to the color of oxygenated hemoglobin circulating in your blood vessels. There are some other factors that affect skin color or like emotional stimuli or diseases, redness, jaundice, bronzing, or cyanosis. I would be familiar with these different factors or like stimuli, but they're not as important as these 3 here. If you don't have access to the notes, please see me after and I can email them to you. Okay, next we're going to talk a little bit about skin appendages. When we're talking about appendages of the skin, we're talking about hair, nails, glands. And the first one we're going to talk about are the glands. So the first one is sweat glands or sudoriferous. You're going to want to make sure you're familiar with both of these words, just in case you see one and not the other on the exam. So our sudoriferous glands are distributed over the entire skin surface, except for nipples and the parts of genital areas. And then with the sweat glands, we have eccrine and apocrine. Eccrine are the most numerous. They are like coiled, which you can see on some of the models. They're coiled. And these are abundant, again, on your palms, the soles of your feet, and your forehead. And these are secreted by exocytosis. The other big thing to know with the sweat glands is this is regulated by your sympathetic nervous system to control body temperature. So again, sweat glands regulated by your sympathetic nervous system, which we haven't talked about, but it will come up, and then to control body temperature. Right, so when you're sweating or when you're working out, you start sweating. It's your body's way of trying to cool you down. Okay, and then second, we have apocrine. This is located in the axillary and anogenital areas. The ducts empty into a hair follicle, and this begins to function at puberty age. And these are the sweat gland, or yeah, the sweat glands that stink, that produce body odor. So again, sweat glands, eccrine, apocrine, make sure you know the difference between the two. You're able to identify where they're found, and then their function. Or be able to describe them, like apocrine creates body odor. Okay, and then another type of gland, we have ceruminous. I know my class barely got here today and yesterday, so this may be kind of brand new to some of you. These are modified apocrine glands in your ear canal. So ceruminous in your ear canal secrete cerumen or earwax, spelled wrong up there. It should be C-E-R-E, C-E-R-U, not this up here. I think spell check got me there. So again, the ceruminous glands secrete cerumen or earwax. And then the last one we're going to talk about is mammary glands. These are specialized sweat glands that secrete milk. Just kidding, one more. Sebaceous glands, these are holocrine. They secrete sebum and found everywhere except for your palms and your soles. So because sebaceous glands, or what is it about sebaceous glands that they're not found on the palms and soles? The presence of what? Or what is found within your sebaceous glands that we don't have on our palms and soles? Pores, yeah, pores, so we don't have hair, right? We don't have hairs on our palms or soles. And that's why there's no sebaceous glands there. Okay, and then moving into hair, these are formed by fused keratinized cells. I'm not gonna talk too much about the hair, just because my class, we didn't really get there. So I don't know how much of that is going to be tested. One thing you should know about hair color is determined by the melanocytes. Those who have gray or white hair have a decrease in melanin production. Okay. And then what are some homeostatic imbalances of the integumentary system? Does anybody have any ideas? What could occur that could throw your body out of homeostasis regarding the integumentary system? Burns. So we have burns, frostbite, or cancer. So burns, we have first, second, and third degree burns. I would be familiar with each of those and then like which or characteristics of them. So first degree would be only your epidermis is damaged. So for example, sunburn. Mhm. Second degree, your epidermis and upper dermis is damaged. So this would be you spill something hot on yourself, you touch something, and you get blisters. And then third degree is damage to your entire skin thickness. And a lot of the time with third degree burns, the area that is burned is not painful due to the damage of nerves. And then there's some extra information about like the criticalness of the burns. I'm not entirely sure if you guys need to know that, but if you do, so over 25% of the body, or you're considered a critical burn if over 25% of your body has second degree burns, or if over 10% of your body has third degree burns. Okay, and then just on the opposite side of the scale, frostbite, damage of cells to skin by exposure to extreme cold. This is classified similarly to burns. And then cancer is another homeostatic imbalance of the integumentary system. So basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and then malignant melanoma. The most common is the basal cell carcinoma. And then, what's not up there? The malignant melanoma is often associated with moles. And then I did put the ABCDE rule on here because I know last semester that was a question on one of the exams. This is how, or this is like a tool used to recognize a melanoma spot. So the A stands for asymmetry, B, border irregularity, C, color, D, diameter, and then E, elevation. So if you have or know someone with like a weird spot on their body, these are the things to look out for. That was it for integumentary. And now chapter 6 is bones and skeletal tissues. Okay. So in your own words, what is the function of bones? Just throw them at me. Support. Protect. Yeah, what are they protecting? Organs, yep. Movement, storage, so our bones are actually really good at storing calcium and minerals. And then another big thing that you'll hear quite a few times is cell formation or hematopoiesis. Hematopoiesis in adults, the red bone marrow produces red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. This is usually a question on the exam, is hematopoiesis. So you want to make sure you are familiar with it. You may want to go back in your book or your notes and read up on that. But again, yeah, you're going to want to know the function of bones. And then again, a lot of the bone stuff is lab, so we're going to do as much lecture stuff as we can. 206 bones. This is comprised of axial and appendicular. We divide it into two different sections. So the axial skeleton is bones of your skull, vertebral column, and rib cage. So those of us in the lab, skull up here, vertebral column in the back, which is your spine, and then your rib cage here. And then our appendicular skeleton is bones of the upper and lower limbs, and your shoulder and hip girdles. I can see this being asked on the lecture exam. Let's see, humerus, tibia, and left os coxae make up which division of the skeletal system? Appendicular. So you're going to want to make sure you know which bones belong to which division.
So humerus or what else?
Humerus, tibia, and os coxae. Yeah, that's like one pelvis, or one side of the pelvis. And then additionally, our bones are classified by shape. So this is another way this can come up on the lecture exam. You know, the humerus is an example of what type of bone? Long bone. So again, long bones, these are usually longer than they are wide. So humerus, radius, ulna, femur. Where a lot of students get confused is your phalanges are considered long bones. And then we have our short bones. These are cube-shaped, and so an example of this are your carpals and tarsals, which are your bones of the wrist, and then bones of the feet. Short bones, right? Cube-shaped. Whenever this is asked, like on an exam or something, they ask you to write any bone that's a short bone. Cuboid, it's kind of in the name. So cube-shaped, cuboid. That is a bone of your foot. And then we have flat bones. These are thin, flattened bones. So cranium, a lot of students get confused, like why specific parts of the skull are considered flat. It's because if you take it apart, they're flat. When they're all together, I mean, it's still pretty flat, but it's not the flat that you would think of. But when they're taken apart, they are considered flat. Your ribs are flat bone, and then kind of the easy one to remember is your sternum. And then irregular, your vertebra. And then this image on the right is something, well, this specific image is going to show up on your lab exam, but we did cover it in lecture today, so I wanted to throw it in there. Just knowing the specific parts of the structure of the long bone is important. Specifically for lecture, the medullary cavity, which is number 7. This contains your yellow bone marrow. And then another big thing we talked about is this epiphyseal plate or line. So this shrinks as you grow older, right? So the epiphyseal plate is cartilage at the junction of the epiphyses, which is up here. Number 1 up here is your epiphyses. and diaphyses, which is the second one here. So epiphyses is number 1, diaphyses is number 2, diaphysis. And then here is that epiphyseal plate. Between the ages of 18 and 22, it becomes the epiphyseal line.
Where's the plate?
This one right here, number 5.
Oh.
Yeah, you can barely see it. That eventually goes away once you are done growing. Again, this is more lab-based, but we did talk about it in lecture today, so I wanted to bring it up. Another thing that is on my notes and seems pretty important, it's not on here, but the hematopoietic tissue. This is the formation of blood cells, and this occurs mostly in flat bones. So that would be your sternum. And then it can also occur in irregular bones, such as your os coxae, which those are like your left side of your pelvis and the right side of your pelvis when they're not together. And then again, with the hematopoietic tissue, it's also the process occurs in the head of your femur and humerus. That's because those are 2 of your larger bones. And that head, you can't really see it because this is a humerus, but it is pretty thick. So it allows for that to occur there. And again, your femur is your largest and thickest bone in your body. So there's a lot going on within that guy. Okay, now we're going to talk about the chemical composition of bones. So we have our organic component, which again, it can get kind of confusing with all of the osteo stuff because they all end up sounding the same. So make sure you're paying attention on your exam. If it is asking you for a specific component, double check what you're clicking. So first we have osteoblasts. These are bone forming cells. These secrete matrix and form a new bone, or form new bone, not a new bone. Again, that was osteoblast. Osteoclast are bone destroying cells. These secrete enzymes that digest your bone and play a role in bone growth, remodeling, and healing. So I think the way Mr. Torres explains these is osteoclasts. Think of it like a cleaver, and they're kind of like attacking and trying to like degrade your bone.
Making it small.
Yeah, like destroying it. That's the word, destroying. So again, osteoblasts have a role in forming new bone. Osteoclasts are bone destroying cells. They have a role in remodeling and healing. Osteocytes are mature bone cells. And these play a role in maintaining bone structure. And then osteoids is the organic part of the matrix. And these include proteoglycans, glycoproteins, and collagen. So I can say that again because I don't have that up there. But osteoids are the organic part of the matrix that include proteoglycans, glycoproteins, and collagen. And those organic components are about 1/3 of, let's say, for example, a long bone, really any bone. So about 33%. The inorganic components are the rest, so 2/3 or about 66%. These are mineral salts called hydroxyapatites. And this is also where bone gets its hardness from. So if you've had a chance to pick up some of the bones that we were looking at in the lab or in here in 30111, if you pick up a femur, it's pretty hard and heavy. Same thing with like a real human skeleton femur. They're hard and heavy. These are due to the hydroxyapatites. Okay, moving forward. Next, we're going to talk about bone growth. So we talk about bone growth in length and thickness. So bone growth in length, this is or occurs until early adulthood. And it's, again, those epiphyseal plates allowing for the bones to grow in length, right? So allowing us, some of us, to get taller. Not me. I stopped a long time ago. And then a big thing to know with bone growth and length is the activity of epiphyseal plate is influenced by your growth hormone. So again, bone growth and length, the activity of epiphyseal plate is influenced by growth hormone. Sometimes you may see it just as GH. Next, we have bone growth in thickness via appositional growth, right? So we were talking about length. Now we're talking about thickness or width. This one has like a very specific way in which it occurs. So again, we have those osteoblasts, which are the bone forming cells. These deposit new bone tissue on the external surface of the bone. Then we have the osteoclasts, removing old bone tissue from the inner surface of the bone. And then this results in a thickening of the bone and an enlargement of the medullary cavity, which again, we talked about, which is this, it's labeled number 7 here. I'm not sure how good you can see that, but that's what we're talking about, where the yellow bone marrow is. Okay, and just like the rest of our body has to stay within homeostasis, so do our bones. So remodel and repair. So for remodeling, the bone deposit and bone resorption occur at the surfaces of the periosteum and endosteum. Remember, the periosteum is this outside right here. You can also see it on that compact bone model back there. Here's that periosteum. And then the process coordinated by remodeling units of osteoblasts and osteoclasts. I have a really bad habit of just saying like blasts and clasts, but you are going to want to make sure you add osteo to it, to the front of it. The bone deposit occurs due to injury or need of added bone. The total bone mass remains constant. The osteoid seam is an unmineralized band of bone matrix. the calcification front is the transition points between mineralized and unmineralized bone. And those osteoblasts secrete alkaline phosphatase that is an essential ingredient for bone mineralization. And then the osteoclasts secrete enzymes and hydrochloric acid. And this is bone remodeling. Bone repair includes hematoma formation. So a bone breaks and the blood vessels rupture. A blood clot forms a hematoma at the fracture site. And then we have, depending on the severity, general inflammation and death of some bone cells. Bone cells. So after the hematoma, we then have fibrocartilaginous callus formation. So a callus will form. Then a capillary will grow into the hematoma and phagocytes clean up the area. And then fibroblasts and osteoblasts migrate into site from the periosteal and endosteal membranes and start bone deposit. And then those fibroblasts produce collagen fibers that span the break. And then after the fibrocartilaginous callus, we have the bony callus formation. This is when osteoblasts and the osteoclast are active, and that fibrocartilage is replaced by spongy bone. The bone callus is formed and the bone is essentially healed. This whole process is when we're talking about a minor fracture. You know, when we're going to get into the types of breaks, but when we have, what is it, a like super compound fracture, I think it is, it's a different story. And then bone remodeling, the excess bone callus outside the bone shaft, and then within that medullary cavity is removed, and then the spongy bone is converted to compact bone. And then I didn't get to put this on the PowerPoint, but Mr. Torres specifically talked about it today, the hormonal mechanisms. So I believe he said this would be asked in the form of a matching question on the exam. So the two hormones that you need to know are the parathyroid hormone, or PTH, and then calcitonin hormone. And I'm going to call it the PTH, is released when blood levels of calcium decline. And the PTH stimulates osteoclast activity and bone resorption. And then the calcitonin hormone is released when the blood level of calcium rises. So I think he said, or like I said, it was a matching question. So I can see them giving you like blank is released when blood levels of calcium decline, blank is released when blood levels of calcium rise, and then you'd have to put in the correct hormone. So yes, make sure you go back and look at those two hormones. I'm not sure what it says about it in the text, but that may be worth going back and looking after, since that is going to be on your lecture exam. Okay, and we did not talk about this in my class, but it is on your notes, so I thought I'd talk about it a little bit. There's different types of fractures that, again, right, if we have a complete breakdown here, that's obviously going to require some type of surgery. So the same process would occur with the different bone cells traveling to that area, but it's not right as quick as a simple fracture like this. So simple fracture, right? The bone is broken, but it's not protruding the skin like a compound fracture. So again, simple, bone breaks cleanly. Compound, the ends of the bones protrude through soft tissues and the skin. This can create an infection. Let's see. We move all the way to the right. This is a compression fracture. Does anybody remember what type of tissue is between these discs or is in these discs here? Fibrocartilage, good. And what are these discs called? Yeah, the intervertebral discs. So this would be a compression fracture. It's like when the bone is crushed. This often occurs due to osteoporosis. Impacted is on your notes. It's when a part of the bone breaks and it kind of not sinks, but like goes into another part of your bone. This green stick fracture here is pretty common. The bone breaks, but not completely. So it's not a full break, but it does have like a partial break. This occurs a lot in younger children. And then let's see, spiral is here. This is the result of like twisting. So the bone breaks due to excessive twisting. And some of these that are on here are a little bit extra. You guys don't need to know these, but I thought it was worth going over since it is on your notes. And then lastly, what are some examples of homeostatic imbalances of bone? Yep. So rickets, osteoporosis, osteomalacia, Paget's disease. These are just some of them that were on your notes. I think it's pretty specific or professor specific whether or not they ask you about certain diseases of bones or in general. I would just make sure you know a couple of these and be able to identify like why this is a homeostatic imbalance of bone or what causes this. For example, the osteomalacia is an inadequate mineralization resulting in weak bones and pain due to insufficient calcium or vitamin D deficiency. So just things like that you're going to want to know. If you find your own that you think is cool, I'm pretty sure that would be acceptable for, say, your essay. I don't actually know what your essay question is for this exam. I haven't had a chance to look at the review. Okay. Okay, yeah. So some of you may know what your essay question is so far. You do want to make sure you're preparing that ahead of time. And we do have some practice exams available in Free 0111. I will have the practice lab exam set up by tomorrow. I just wanted to make sure this was ready to go as well as the practice lecture exams. But if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'll stick around, but we are done.
Lab questions, you mean these, right?
This is going to be for lecture. That one is for lab.
Okay. No, I think it's the other.